from your experience, because I want to believe that you have been called upon when some cases like this have happened, because you are a senior lecturer in Jos, which means some of these cases might have come to your table at one time or another, or even for curiosity's sake, you might want to understand some of these things. So, what do you think is one of the most common causes? Is it the soil, the structural design of the building, or the material? So that at least we can try to see what can be the possible solution.
Yes, the most, cause of building collapse in Nigeria normally come from the implementation of the design. Not just the design, because the structural engineer will do the design based on the advice given to him by the geotechnical engineer from the soil investigation results. The structural engineer will carry out the building design and, of course, hand it over to the clients who will now arrange for the building itself, the construction work. So in most cases, the people doing the construction normally deviates from the design. You will see, for example, the incidence of the 21-story building collapse in Ikoyi, Lagos. Originally, investigation by the Nigerian Institute of Structural Engineers show that the building was originally designed as 6 floors, that's 6-story buildings. Then it was later changed to 12, then later to 15, and the last one was to 21. So in most cases of building design, deviation from the initial design is what normally causes the collapse in most cases.
All right, thank you very much for that. That is very important. All right, so they modify a house that was actually designed for 6-story building to 21-story building. All right, that is interesting. Now, when they begin to make those modifications, they usually request for authorization, or me that is building a house, I can just decide to modify it anytime without taking authorization from the government, who is, because you have already made mention of 2 agencies that are usually called upon when incident of collapse happen. So what I'm trying to understand now is that, say, maybe I'll be giving you authorization to build a 6-story building, then suddenly this house start moving from 6-story building to 10 to 15 to 20. Those additional stories that are on top of them, do I need authorization from them, or can I do it without authorization?
In fact, it must be done with authorization. That is why you will recall that when the incidents of the collapse at Ikoyi happened, the government quickly stated the number of stories they actually permitted them to build. So no one is allowed to, on their own, change the initial permitted number of story without going back to the same government that gave the permission initially for approval of the additional stories. But the problem there is this: when even for cases in which the individual's clients go back to the authorizing government to have approval of their changes, there are other considerations that the permitting agency will look at. You see, if you are permitted to build 6-story building, and you have designed and constructed your foundation based on 6-story building, now you go back for permission to increase the number of stories. You know that of course no one will give such an approval. That's this particular reason is what normally prevent them from going back, because if you go, how do you expect a government agency that has approved 6-story building and you have done your design and construction of foundation? The foundation has been designed to carry 6-story building. What kind of approval can be given to build 12? What normally happens is this: when we design foundations, you see, when you do the soil test, we do soil tests at different intervals. Okay, let's say, for example, at 1 meter interval, you want to build any number of story building, you do the soil investigation you dig up to 1 meter. At 1 meter, you carry soil samples for laboratory testing. At 2 meter, that's how you continue up to 40, 60, 70 meter depth, depending on the depending on the type of structure, the load you want to apply on it, and the sensitivity of the structure itself. So at this interval, you take soil samples to the laboratory to determine the soil properties in terms of soil classification, the strength, the compressibility, and deformation. So when you do all this, you will now look at the load you want to apply. That will now determine at what depth you are to apply, you are to load your foundation. For example, if you have just 3-story building now, you may observe that you can put your foundation at 5 meter depth, or let's say even 2 meter depth, 3 meter depth. But if that is 3-story building, now if you have 10-story building, definitely you know that the depth to apply that will go down. From the soil investigation, that will show you, okay, if it is 1 story, this is where you should put your foundation. If it is 3-story, this is the depth that can withstand that load. If it is 5-story, this is the depth that can withstand that load. Now, you are given permission to build 6, and you have laid your foundation at depth that can withstand 6-story building. What kind of authorization can be given again for 6-story building? Because except you are ready to remove the initial foundation and replace them for the new modification that is being done.
That's interesting. That means now that the person who go ahead and modify his plan without the proper authorization is already going against the law in this case. So we cannot expect the government, in this case the Nigerian government, to be held accountable for the collapse. Then who is responsible? Who pays for the consequence?
Yes, this normally come between 3. Well, it could be more than 3. But number 1, we cannot exempt the government single-handedly like that. You see, things are happening. If we are sure that nobody in the agency openly or secretly give them approval, so that is when we can exempt the government. But if there is possibility for anybody, maybe for any special benefits, giving approval, I mean, in using his position to give approval, which should not have been given following due process, you know, in that case, the government can be held responsible. That's number 1. Number 2, the client, the owner of the building, in most cases, they are always the culprits. They handle things. In fact, you will observe that in many cases, they change architects, they change engineers, they change professionals, because the client, that's the owner of the building, want to prove that it is his property, so he is to determine what happened. So you as a professional, you know what he wants will not work. Take, for example, now, he wants his very large sitting room to have no single column. That is the one they call pillar.
The pillar.
Yes, of course. We all know that for aesthetic purpose, you should not have a pillar at the middle of a sitting room. But then, if you don't want to have a pillar, then you have to increase the depth of your beam, which means you have a beam that will pass through the middle of the sitting room. But even that you don't want to see. How will you now put a very large slab without a support? And that is what he wants. And some of our architects also they do their design now, and now they leave the whole thing for you, the engineer, to determine. So engineer, after seeing the architectural design, and he advised the architect that this is not possible. You have to put support in this at this point. They go back to the client. He will reject that. This is how he wants. So in most cases, you see them changing. Now, that particular engineer, they will stop him. If, of course, to honor himself and for his own integrity, he will stop the work. They will bring another one who doesn't even know the history, of the building, where it is started from, what are the modifications that have been done technically. So, of course, this kind of thing will not have proper handing over. The second engineer will come, carry on, and a lot of things happen. So, as I said, we cannot exempt the government, and these are the the conditions over which the government may be held responsible. That is, if somebody gave approval, openly or secretly, which is not supposed to be given. Then also, if the engineers, maybe the engineer accepted to do modification that is not supposed to be done, so the engineer can be held responsible too. You are the engineer. You know this is not supposed to be done. It affects the stability of the structure, and you went ahead to do it because the client want you to do it. The client who doesn't know anything about structures want you to do it, and you follow him, or the architect told you that I have done it before, just do it. No, nobody talk about architect in this case. But there are many cases, they are the ones that normally ginger the engineer to do it. You do it, something happen, you'll be held responsible. So this is the second person. The engineer can be held responsible, either the one that initiated it or the one that continue later on. Then also the material, the engineer can be held responsible based on the design, based on the construction, and based on the material that is used, because everything is under him. He's the one that's supposed to take to look over the quality control. Now also, the third person that could be held responsible for building collapse, apart from the government, the client. Okay, yes, the client or the engineer. So sorry, these are the three category of people that could be held responsible.